So let me just go through where some of our thinking is leading in each of those areas. In development, there's been a tremendous emphasis, and rightly so, in recent years on poverty reduction, on seeing that the aid effort actually does result in the reduction of poverty. But this is an area where what starts off sensibly, rapidly becomes a doctrine and a fashion. And I think it's moved to the point where, unless the expenditure is directly and immediately seen to be poverty inducing, it's on health, it's on education, it's on nutrition, then it really doesn't fulfill the poverty reduction criteria. And so the whole emphasis on economic growth and on improvement of the ability of the country to ultimately prosper has diminished. And it's small wonder, if you don't put any emphasis on economic growth, you don't get much. And it's both at the donor's end and also all too often at the recipient end, there has been this declining emphasis or lack of emphasis on growth policies. There's a very good book by Matthew Lockwood called The State We're In, The State They're In. And his analysis is that one of the reasons African countries have not prospered in the way that much of East and South Asia has is that East and South Asia, in his analysis, have developmental states. They have states who put economic growth first, who rely for their electoral support or popular acquiescence, if they're not particularly democratic, on raising living standards. And people will put up with the government as long as their living standards are right. Whereas he says that in many African countries, and to some extent Latin American countries, it's more a patrimonial state. That the emphasis of the state is to buy the support of its electors through direct transfers, sometimes ripping off the state budget so that you can transfer the money to your clan or tribe or village or family. But there's been much less emphasis on developmental use of money. And we would like to see an emphasis at both ends moving back towards growth and development. It's one of our people from an NGO, Will Day, in fact, said the answer to poverty is prosperity. And actually, it's not dependence. In the long run, we have to help countries create the wealth that is going to make them prosperous and both poverty and reliance on aid. Within the development area too, ultimately most of that prosperity is going to come from successful private business, both domestic businesses, small, medium-sized, micro-enterprises, and international enterprises investing and developing. They will only do so if there's a proper infrastructure. And we can help in the construction of that infrastructure. And that infrastructure is of two kinds. There's a physical infrastructure. Are there ports? Are there roads? Is there electricity? Is there water available within providing the framework within which business can prosper? And often there isn't, and we have to help them. And secondly, the commercial, legal, and institutional infrastructure. Is there a system of property rights? People don't actually know what they own and have no security in what they own or in things in which they've invested. They're unlikely to invest in them or to use what they own, their land very often, as collateral to borrow and build up their business. So absolutely essential is building up a proper system of infrastructure, but one that reflects, so far as possible, the existing traditional property rights, but entrenches them and makes them known. People can be secure in them, they can use them then as a basis for economic activity. And we believe that we should be doing more to help countries build up this sort of thing. I was out in Nigeria in the summer, and we are helping actually Nigeria just build up a property register in Lagos. Properties there. Presently, drive through Lagos, you'll see written on people's houses, this house is not for sale. Because otherwise, they're likely to come back in the evening and find someone has sold it to someone else. And the new owners moved in. This is not a satisfactory situation. Better still that there be a proper land registry and people could work out who owned it and not be able to that kind of fraudulent structure. Trade. I believe in free trade. A lot of people draw a contrast between free trade and fair trade. If you really believe in free trade, you believe that it's good for you unilaterally. That you don't actually have to wait for the other countries to reciprocate. And I'm a true believer. I believe that free trade is good for this country. It's good for Europe. It's probably good for Africa and Asia, but it's certainly good for us. And therefore, we ought to open our markets to the products of the developing countries instead of excluding them either through tariffs, quotas, or through the common agricultural policy, as we do. And effectively, we exclude the very products which most developing countries would find easiest to export, agricultural products, labour-intensive manufactures. And so our first objective would be to try and liberalise trading policy within the European Union, and not necessarily demand that the developing countries reciprocate. There is, after all, an asymmetry between the developed countries and the developing countries. What we do can very negatively impinge on Ghana, on Gabon, on Ecuador. What Ecuador or Gabon or Ghana does, frankly, is not going to make a huge difference to the living standards of this country. If they choose to adopt protectionist policies, maybe bad for them, it's not going to have much effect on us. So essentially, while I believe that by and large they would benefit from liberalisation, and particularly if they want to offset the Dutch disease effect, they need to liberalise their economies. That shouldn't be a requirement of us. We should be first and foremost saying, let's open our markets to them and leave them with some freedom to decide their own policies. But there is an area where too little attention is being paid in trade policy. If you look at North America, 40% of the foreign trade of the countries of North America is between each other. It's not with the rest of the world, it's between Canada, United States and Mexico. Something over 60% of the foreign trade of countries in Europe is with other European countries. Only 10% of the foreign trade of African countries is with each other. All the rest is without the continent, it's exports elsewhere. And the level of tariffs and restrictions between African countries is greater than the level they face in trying to enter North American or European markets. So we ought to be encouraging the development, ultimately, of a free trade area for Africa. So, okay, fair enough, you may want barriers against the countries outside, but why have barriers against each other? And we should be offering, perhaps, to help finance infrastructure within Africa, to help actually make it physically easier and more possible for African countries to trade with each other and develop with each other and overcome the vested interests which always lie behind in any country systems of protection that they erect against each other.